Of the Equity Board to order at 6:02 p.m. Due to the hybrid format of today's meeting, I'd like to start by providing some guidelines. This is a reminder that the meeting is being recorded and that we have live Spanish interpretation happening in the background. We have participants attending in person and others who may be attending by computer or by phone. For all meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. If applicable, mute your microphone when not speaking. If having technical issues, try joining the meeting by using a different device, like a smartphone or tablet, or use the call-in information in the meeting invitation to call into the meeting. Okay, and with that, I guess, Dale, do we have any absences or excused absences?
We do. We have excused absences this evening. Helen is not going to be joining us this evening. It's the same reason that she's communicated to Monica previously and will not be in attendance tonight. Also, Ray Manahan will not be in attendance tonight. Ray is away on business. This is an excused absence. And Shay will also not be here this evening. This is an excused absence. We have a few people we have at least one person who's in transit. So Tony should be joining us. I've not heard back from Lucrezia if she's planning to join this evening. I don't know if you had any other communication from folks ahead of time.
No, I do not.
Okay.
Okay, so then shall we do roll call?
Mm-hmm.
And Dale, could you help with that?
Absolutely. This is also my first time on. We start with Christina Aponce.
Hi, here everyone. Present.
Christina. Lorna Gilmore.
Present.
Ellen is absent. Lucrezia is not online. Nima is absent. Tony Curry.
I am here. Sorry, I'm having problems with my camera right now.
No worries, Tony. Glad to have you. Ray is absent. Shay Fleming is absent. Preeti Modipan.
Here.
Karthik, you're going to tell me with your last name. I'm going to. Kashina.
Here.
And Kelly Munn.
Yeah.
Excellent. We have form.
Great. And now we'll move into public comments. I know we have at least one person for public comments. Dale, do you know if there are other folks?
We did not receive any we did not receive any emails ahead of today, and we did not receive any other requests for public comment ahead of the meeting.
Okay. Let's see. So I'm looking at if there's any instructions I should be providing. I'm guessing not. So if you would like to, please come on up.
Should we do?
Yes.
Yeah.
Consider staying, okay. Pleasure to sit down with you. I'm Ted Lucas, lived here in Issaquah for many years, since 2013 now, been here a long time, on Newport Way, and I'm a member of the Baha'i community, as you know, and we're here to actually have the physical handout, date, place, and time for the next community building social, which many of you know about, some of you may not, and the idea is just to have a forum and have it very friendly, with a potluck dinner, and usually a theme, all about community building. In this case, it'll be about celebrating service to community service. We all do that, and it's a wonderful thing. And Kim Weiss, I'm not sure I met her once, and she's with Issaquah and Sammamish Nourishing Network to kind of be a good example of community service and opportunities, and to share opportunities. That'll be the 30 or 40-minute conversation topic. Sharing opportunities for community service in our town of Issaquah and so on. And then a little bit of music and art and just playing social, which is a great opportunity I know the Equity Board members have found to have contact and just talk with people here in Issaquah from many different backgrounds. So with pleasure inviting you. Any questions, there's a phone number there at the bottom and there's an address. It's in a family home, which is big enough for everybody. And it's always a pleasure and a lot of fun. So look forward to perhaps seeing you. And the idea is not only for yourself, but to invite others, naturally, including teenagers. We're trying to get young people, young adults to join us and have these conversations also. So look forward if you're able to join us. Still a few weeks away on October 28th, that's a Saturday. And either to one of you, one of us will send you an email so you can distribute an email kind of reminder about this a little bit later. Should it be to you or?
If you don't have the also address, I'm happy to share it and then, yeah, we can, whichever is easier, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do we bring food? Does it potluck?
Well, yes, you can.
Okay,
I would definitely not say no.
okay, that sounds
There's-
good. I just didn't want to bring one and then be
But
there.
please do, yeah,
Okay.
if you'd like to. There's plenty of these invitations. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I just want to do a quick check. I don't see anyone else around for public comment. Okay, so we will move to the next agenda item, which is the approval of minutes. And I would like to invite the board now, if they haven't already, to review the minutes from our September 6th session and see, let's see, once you maybe take 2 minutes to review, and then I would like to ask a member to make a motion to approve the minutes. So let's pause for a sec, or a minute. Okay, I think, trying to see if anyone's eyes are still looking like they're reading. Let's see, do we have a motion to approve? Or would anyone, I guess, I think there's first a motion, and then we can ask if there's discussion. So we first need that motion.
Sure. Motion to approve.
Thank you, Karthik. Does anyone have any comments or discussion on these minutes?
With a second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Second.
Kelly, second.
Can I second? I keep forgetting these rules because I am an alternate
Yes, but if you're in person, then I think, and they're not.
and they're not.
you're-
Okay, thank you. So then I could have made the motion too. All right.
Okay, so we have the motion, we have the second. So any discussion? So I actually have a point that I would like to discuss really quickly, and it's related to the first part of the agenda, responding to public comments. Actually, no, it's not. It's in the, there we go. Let's see. Okay, it's in the other business, and it's the discussion of the July joint meeting with the Economic Vitality Commission. And I recall, so there's a statement here making the optional equity training be mandatory for all members as a prerequisite. And I think I heard, I don't know if I should name names, someone make a stronger statement about it. And so I just wanted to check to see if someone wanted a stronger statement rather than prerequisite in the minutes. Anyone feeling like a stronger statement there?
I think I did suggest that it be mandatory, and so I don't know if there was something else that happened. I can't remember this time, but I think I had made the suggestion that all people on commissions have be part of their meetings and agenda items to have trainings done during that time. Because for example, we can have a recommended glossary, but is anyone actually going to read it if it's an optional item? Or will everyone be reading it if it's optional?
Okay, so I guess, and Lorna, I was referencing your comment, so I'm glad you said something. Did you want a stronger statement than what's listed here? Or does this reflect your comment? Do you feel comfortable with how it's reflected here?
I think I was confused because it said they discussed making the recommendation, so I don't know if it was me making the recommendation and if everybody else agreed. And so I left it alone because I wasn't sure if other people were in agreement that about this, because this is a summary of what we as a group have decided. I know that was my opinion. So I don't know if we need to maybe table this and then have a conversation again to see if this needs to be a stronger statement or if it's just my opinion within the group.
Okay, I think to me, I just wanted to make sure it reflected the statement that you were making. So, okay. And then I see Tony's got his hand raised.
Yes, I was just actually just going to agree with Lorna, and I'm not sure if we need to have a second conversation about it, but yeah, it's something stronger that does state that it should be a requirement.
So I think that might be a formal recommend. So we might have to discuss
Yes.
making a formal recommendation
Yes.
on that. Okay. So it sounds like what's in the minutes reflects that statement, and then we probably want some follow-up on that then.
Okay.
Cool. Just wanting to check.
Thank you. Thank you, Preeti.
Okay, so I think we resolved that. Were there any other items for discussion on these minutes? So I'm not hearing any change needed. Okay. So then I'm looking at my script. Okay, so I think with that, we don't have any edits to suggest to the minutes. And so let's see. And are there any objections to approve the minutes as presented? Okay, then I think I will proceed to consider the minutes approved as presented. Great. Okay, so the next item is a staff report. And is that?
The only staff report we have is that we should make a very quick formal statement. I know we've communicated to the board, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to make a formal statement about our vision.
Yeah, absolutely. Board members, I know that you received an email from me in the last few weeks, and I was excited to share with you that we have a brand new assistant to the city administrator in Bill Market Crimp. She is just amazing. We are lucky to have her. And with her new role, with her new position comes also a new role. The staff liaison role transitions to her new position. So while I'm half sad, half excited, I'm definitely super excited that the role of the equity board liaisonship moves into the executive office. And then absolutely Dale is an amazing professional to have. While I'm going to remain and focus on my actual job, human services, we have plenty of things to do there, and I will continue, of course, in human services. We always focus on equity and making sure that those who are at margins are included and have what they need. So I hope we are not going to be strangers to one another, but I'm just excited, and thank you so much for all of your work. I've been privileged to be part of this since the Human Services Commission started first working on what should the role of residents be in the city's equity initiatives. We had Ted Lucas and his group and many other community members part of this journey for the last 3 years. So I'm happy for the new stage in this. And so with that, as you saw, we've been communicating with Dale for the last few weeks, and she's here tonight. But yeah. Oh, and so thank you on my end, and Dale, congratulations, and thank you for all your work. And you're in absolutely amazing hands with Dale. So we are really, really lucky to have her.
Yeah, and thank you, Monica. I mean, there's some applause, some silent applause happening from our virtual attendees. Big shoes to fill, but also really excited for the work, really passionate about this particular board, and getting to be with you all. And although Monica might not staff this meeting, she'll certainly be back to present and to seek the guidance of this group and the partnership of this group. So, yeah, grateful for you, Monica.
Same here. Thank you.
Awesome. With that, we can transition into our agenda items.
Okay, great. Well, and thank you so much, Monica, for the number of years you've spent really growing the board and supporting the board. It's been an honor to work with you as well.
Same for sure.
We'll look forward to working with Dale. So thank you, Dale, for picking up the role.
And I'd like to say that the move feels, I mean, I miss you and welcome you. However, it feels like a step forward for the organization as a whole. And that could be a really important step, right? Opportunities and challenges.
Agreed.
Okay, and with that, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the comprehensive plan update policy discussion. And I guess, Dale, is there any opening you would like to make before handing it over?
I guess before handing it over to Stephen, I'd just like to say, and you'll experience this when Holly steps up as well this evening, we have a really exciting planning and development focused evening. It was nice that we were able to couple these two discussions together, as I think getting into the planning world is something that takes me a minute or two or years to get my brain space in the right place. So we have two items this evening: comprehensive plan update and a discussion of community planning and development's approach to noticing as it pertains to the use of the equity framework questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Stephen.
Thank you, Dale. So for everyone's been, my name is Stephen Padua. I'm the long-range planning manager for the city. And so my team is tasked with a lot of the long-range projects for the city, whether it's planning documents, policies, any development regulations. And we work with a lot of the other departments to help formulate updates to our code as well as our planning documents. So I think I'm sharing my screen now, yes. There's a lot to cover in terms of what the comprehensive plan is. I don't know everybody's experience when it comes to this planning document. Please feel free to ask questions as I'm going through the presentation. Don't feel like you have to wait till the very end. Harry, I'll slow down. So my group is located in the Community and Planning Development Department. And under the executive department and the mayor, we help look at development regulations as well as planning documents throughout the city. My team within community planning development is the long range planning team. Everyone's picture is on the screen. This makes up everybody for land use, for transportation, for housing, and a lot of the policy discussions you typically see someone on my team as part of those conversations. The purpose of tonight's discussion is to review the approach that we're taking with the comprehensive plan and evaluating racial equity in this periodic update, and I'll explain a little bit of what that means. So the questions we have for the board include: does the board have potential changes to the approach that we're taking to the comprehensive plan? Is there other information that would be helpful for the equity analysis as we're going through this process? And are there other recommendations for the Planning Policy Commission, who's the direct city commission that we work with to update the comprehensive plan? So background, the comprehensive plan is the city's long-range 20-year visioning document. And it's required by the state. Back in 1990, they adopted something called the Growth Management Act. And the purpose of this act was to essentially have all planning cities and counties start formulating this 20-year vision that addresses population growth, as well as sprawl and quality of life for our communities. And the reason why they kind of forced everybody's hand in doing this is because everybody was kind of planning at different levels. And there was no coordination at a regional level of managing our resources and making sure that cities were working together as they're planning the combination of growth into our region. And so now there's a much more structured and organized approach of how we're managing growth throughout our region as well as throughout the state. There's two types of updates to consider for the comprehensive plan. The first is we have minor updates that we can take at least once a year or at max once a year. And then we have periodic updates that occur about it's going to be every 10 years now. And the reason I bring this up is right now we're going through the periodic update, which is considered a major update for our comprehensive plans, which is reason behind a lot of the scope of what we're doing for a lot of what we're going to be discussing tonight. We're going to be reviewing all of these elements or topic areas in our comprehensive plan and making sure that policies and goals align, making sure that coordination is being coordinated between the different departments of the city, and that we're having the effective conversations of how are we accommodating growth under these different topic areas. The one thing to note with the elements is that human services and cultural element aren't required elements in our comprehensive plan, but the city of Issaquah has determined that these are important topics to cover with it as we're looking at our 20-year vision. So the process we go for the comprehensive plan update is that we're going to be working with all the city boards and commissions to discuss different policy updates, as well as some of that coordination in case we see any unintended barriers or obstacles as we're looking at implementation of our 20-year vision. All the recommendations from the boards and commissions will go through and be reviewed by the Planning Policy Commission. And then those recommendations, all the boards, commissions, and the Planning Policy Commission recommendations will be reviewed by the City Council, and then they'll ultimately determine adoption. For this periodic update, there's 3 focus areas that my team is really trying to engage a lot of the departments and boards and commissions on. The first in compliance and having a conversation of what's now required of us with either new legislative acts, new policies at the county or regional level that now determine that we need to address new topics. There's also coordination across different elements in the comprehensive plan, and that's important because the history behind a lot of the elements is that since our last periodic update, we've developed several new implementation plans. The Human Services Strategic Plan is a good example of we adopted something new that determines new goals and policies for that topic area, which now we need to update the element in the comprehensive plan to now be consistent with the new implementation or strategic plan. And we've done that for transportation, human services, climate change, and I'm probably forgetting one more, but there's several of these implementation action plans that we now need to make sure the comprehensive plan is consistent with. The last piece that we're also focusing on is design and access of the comprehensive plan. Previously, it was kind of treated as this long-range planning document that people somewhat knew existed, but didn't really use. And we think that it's a completely underutilized tool at the city that we can use for budget discussions or discussions on how we're really trying to implement the city's vision. And so we are trying to take a much more in-depth look at how the comprehensive plan is used, as well as how is it accessed. We want to make sure that it's a usable tool for staff, as well as the community knows where to find it. Right now, if you were to go on the city website, you'd have to go through 10 different layers of websites just to find the comprehensive plan and the different elements, which has been frustrating for staff, but it also makes it more non-existent for the community to know it even exists. And we want to fix that. So some of the new requirements that we're considering in this periodic update, they're all listed on the screen. The first is House Bill 1220. That's a new legislation that is having us look at emergency shelters, transitional housing, as well as disparate impacts for different income levels, specifically for housing. I'll talk about that in a little bit. 2 other bills, House Bill 1110 and House Bill 1337, is forcing all cities and counties to look at including additional housing types in single-family zones. And so we're going to be looking at expanding what's allowed in single-family zones from this new legislation. The last bill is House Bill 1181. This one is actually requiring that new climate change or climate resilience element that we're going to be creating with this periodic update. And what they're having us look at is climate vulnerabilities and resilience as it comes to natural disasters, climate change, and making sure as our population grows, we're considering the impacts on the environment as the city or counties are developing. So coming back to the House Bill 1220, the focus of this bill is really to expand how we're doing our housing analysis. So the requirement with the housing element is that we need to look at different income levels and levels of affordable housing and how we're going to be accommodating them. And so that includes a disparate impact analysis of looking at different population groups that either do have access to housing or don't have access to housing, and coming up with policies or at least new methodologies on how we're going to be accommodating those different population groups in the community. This also includes looking at how emergency shelters or transitional housing is being accommodated in the city, as well as affordable housing. And so this will be an additional analysis that we'll be including in the comprehensive plan. So I'm bringing up this slide for discussion of how the comprehensive plan is used in kind of the grand scheme of planning documents, policy discussions, and city budget. So you can see at the top, our comprehensive plan is that 20-year vision. It's really supposed to be that high level goals and policies or objectives that kind of give a little guiding light of how we want to address different topic areas as it relates to growth. Then we have our functional plans, and that includes the strategic plans, action plans, implementation plans, anything that starts to focus in on how we want to achieve that vision and identifying different strategies or priorities for resources to get us closer to what we actually want to see on the ground. And that in turn becomes discussion pieces for financing or implementation as we determine the city budget or updates to our city code. And we look at performance metrics to help guide some of those conversations to determine if we need to make updates to how we're prioritizing investments to the city or how we're making policy decisions around regulations of what we're requiring for new development or for any other type of activities that are permitted throughout the city to make sure that we are achieving the city's vision. Are there any questions? So far, I've kind of thrown a lot out. I want to pause right now in case there are any questions.
Do you evaluate how you did on the plan?
Not on the overall plan.
Yeah.
There's more specific with the performance metrics.
Yeah.
We're seeing how maybe the policies in the comprehensive plan are impacting either the functional plans or the budget or even our development regulations, and then we'll make adjustments based on that. But it's not so much on the over plan itself. It's more of the different topic areas of performance metrics that we use.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm thinking about like how you're describing the different planning cycles here. So the comprehensive plan is a 20-year plan, and then during that 20 years, all these other plans pop up. And so annually or every 8 to 10 years, something like that, you reassess with the new plans that popped up. Is that?
So when each of the functional plans get updated, we'll update the comprehensive plan to make sure they're consistent at all times, as often as we can. But we can only touch the comprehensive plan once a year. And so we make sure the timing of those other plans are updated along with that. Every 10 years, we'll look at everything all at once to make sure that we didn't miss anything in any of those individual updates. Because when we're doing the minor updates at one topic area, we can only see so much at a time when we're doing the minor updates. And so typically we'll have those conversations and we'll continue the conversations, and sometimes we'll find something after the fact and we'll go back and update it. but it's every 10 years is we're actually now opening the door on everything to evaluate every little policy or goal and make sure that we're considering implementation or now talking to our operations staff who may have not have been part of the original conversation and make sure a lot of their feedback is now incorporated with the coordination piece.
Thank you. Stephen, we have a question from Lorna.
Yes, Lorna. I don't know if you're asking the question, but you're on mute, Lorna.
Okay, thank you so much for the presentation. I especially like the fact that you added the cultural piece, given the number of people who live in Issaquah that were not born in this area. One of my questions, or one of my question is there, I love this presentation. Before I joined this committee, I didn't really know much about what happens in the city and what was going on. Are there ways to share this information periodically with people and just gather input or feedback or just educate people as to what's going on? There probably are, and I might have missed town meetings or something, but I'm just wondering if there's something that happens, like some checks with the community about these plans.
Yes, so the intent of a lot of the efforts the city have been going through with updating like our communications, I think it's the communications guideline, is to actually make sure that any of our planning documents or any of these listed plans that are on the screen follow that process of engaging the community in different communication or different community groups in the community who probably weren't part of the conversation originally when it was last developed or updated, and engaging more of those conversations of who is actually impacted or who we not know is impacted by this, and addressing that as part of the next update. And so as we are now starting to update each of these plans, if they didn't already kind of go through a broader engagement process, we are now having that broader engagement process and discussions with the community groups to look at recognized or unintended consequences and impacts. Does that help answer your question?
So can you clarify, are these meetings being planned for sometime in the near future by the communications department?
Yeah, so let's say, for example, the Parks Department's updating their park system plan. They're going through, they're working with the communications group to now look at how to do an engagement process for that entire planning process. Who do they need to engage? Who wasn't engaged before that they need to engage now? And have the conversations of, okay, what data do we have or don't have? What do we need to analyze? And how can that influence some of those policy discussions?
Thank you.
And then a lot of those engagement processes that either already have been conducted or they're about to be conducted feed into the comprehensive plan update process.
I'm gonna jump in for a second.
Yes.
First of all, you have this planning framework up just because it will provide some context to what I'm going to provide later. When you look down at the green levels there, that is the kind of level of planning that I will be talking about. So I'm very happy that Stephen has gone first because he's more macro level, and then as you like break it down, like he provides the framework from which the current planners utilize to administer the code. So we primarily are using that dark green section that says Issaquah Municipal Code. I think it's really helpful to have a visual, and I wish I would have put this in my presentation as well, but since it's up there, I'm just going to say, so that dark green area is the area of planning that I will be addressing later.
Thanks, Holly.
I have another question.
Yes.
We'll go back to the Parks Department. So when the Parks Department talks to community stakeholders or individuals, do they cycle back with the results? Like what was decided and this is the policy and now you know how you contributed?
Yes, they do. So that typically what will happen is, you start with the broader conversations with the community. You ask, what are we doing well? What are we not doing well? How can we change things or prioritize things a little bit different? And then they go through the technical discussions with the Parks Board or any of the other boards and commissions. and then they come back and release those draft goals policies to everybody to review before it even goes to the city council.
Great.
So that's the intent of the communications guidelines update, is to kind of go through that process for all of our planning documents, whether they were developed that way originally or not. Any other questions before I move on? Okay. So one of the things that I thought might be helpful is to describe really the overlap between what's in the comprehensive plan and what's in these functional plans. And it's really going to be those goals and policies that are identified. The 20-year vision has these goals and policies. The functional plans or implementation plans focus on how do we implement that? What are the strategies behind trying to get to what we're really, what the vision is, but also with the resources that we have in place. You know, Issaquah is a smaller community compared to some of our neighbors. We only have so many staff to implement some of this. So bringing some of those goals and policies with a reality check. We can do this over the next 5 to 10 years. And that's what gets identified in those functional plans. And if some of that vision for the goals and policy changes, we need to go back to the comprehensive plan and make sure it's consistent. And the reason why we go through this effort of making sure our comprehensive plan is basically aligned with any of these functional plans or what we're doing on the ground is that if we ever go for grants or get federal funding on something, they usually look at what's in the comprehensive plan. And if we have something that's in the comprehensive plan that's not consistent with what we're proposing, they're going to call us on it. And so it's really important that we maintain consistency for the required and not required elements with our planning documents implementation, because we really like getting federal funding because locally we can't fund everything. And we want to be able to continue doing a lot of the great work that we're doing at the staff level and providing services that we want to provide for a lot of the community members, or even broadening some of those services. So that's kind of the important piece, especially when it comes to our required elements and new legislation. If we don't comply with even new rules at the state level, there's a potential of losing even funding we have in place now. The state could say, we're going to stop, and you actually have to pay us back for the funding we've given you because we don't comply, even if it doesn't even relate to how we got the funding. So consistency is kind of key. That's kind of the main thing I want to put with this slide. So the equity framework. We weren't able to start this project with the equity framework just because we started this well over a year ago of developing the scope and the project and how we were going to take it on. And the equity framework wasn't ready yet. So instead, I tasked my team with kind of looking at 4 different points with the conference plan. First, how can we reframe some of our data analysis to look at community members that are impacted by our policies, and who is impacted or who is unintendedly impacted by our policies, and trying to recognize that. The other part is with the policy analysis and even modern best practices. What are our neighbors doing, or what are analysis being done around us that are recognizing different uses or different strategies for addressing some of those inequities that either we just did not see before or that we just didn't know how to address. And then lastly, it's the functional plan development. As I said already, as we now update a lot of our functional plans that are in place now or develop new ones, we are now making sure the engagement piece is incorporating broader areas or broader population groups that probably weren't part of the conversation originally. So those are the key pieces that we are trying to address through the periodic update, because we just didn't have the framework with the background analysis for each of the elements. So the disparate impacts is required of us to do from the state, but we're also incorporating some of the transportation, economic vitality, and even the climate resilience analysis to also consider some of those disparate impacts, and considering it with some of our policy updates with this periodic update. So as we're looking through each of these different topic areas, we're looking at the data behind some of the policy decisions that were made, as well as some of the conversations we're having with the other boards and commissions to give a better, I would say, a broader strategy of how we're actually trying to achieve the modern vision for the city. Three questions that did come from the framework that we used early on were what are the racial impacts of a particular decision? Who will benefit or be burdened by the particular decision? Or are there solutions to mitigate unintended consequences? Some of what I had spoken to already. But we're having these conversations, particularly with the Planning Policy Commission, as we're going through different policy updates. And as we're evaluating each of the policies, we're kind of identifying areas where we feel like the language needs to be improved or broadened, or at least identify historically disadvantaged population groups who weren't either part of the conversation or we have found have actually experienced unintended consequences or impacts on those population groups. Some of the best practices that we're kind of taking into some of this update is we're looking at gender neutrality as we have policies that are well over 20 years old and they kind of read that way. So we're updating that and making those recommendations to the Planning Policy Commission. We're also recognizing the community. Some of the language is more specific to citizens or only Issaquah's residents, but the Issaquah community is much broader than that. So we're trying to make sure the comprehensive plan is recognizing that in our policy updates as well. We are also pushing to make sure that for any element or any of the functional plan updates, there's much more inclusive engagement. And not just adding it to the checklist that they have to go through with communication, but also explaining the importance of it as they're having those conversations for those updates. The last piece is neighborhood character. This is something that a lot of cities are trying to address in different ways. The way we're addressing neighborhood character, and actually I'll back up. So historically, neighborhood character has been a term that's used for development regulations as well as long-range vision planning documents as a way of just saying, we want to make sure we preserve neighborhood character in single-family zones. As you can imagine, this has been used in a lot of negative ways, and it has a negative connotation to it now that we are trying to change by defining what that means, not necessarily taking it out of the language, but in a policy that's around housing. Say, we want to look at heights, setbacks, building types, the types of housing, and that really providing more intent and definition into what that neighborhood character actually means for those policies. That helps with enforcement when it comes to development regulations, as well as looking at the intent and justifying those regulations in place. Before I move on to schedule, are there any questions on what I've discussed so far?
I have a question.
Yes.
So this might be totally off of where you want to go. So you can defer the question until later. So comprehensive plan seems to be around like land use and other things, correct?
That's part of it, yes.
Okay, part of that. And then, so I'm aware, like historically, over maybe centuries, there have been policies like redlining and things like that, which bring us to a certain place of inequity and, built upon systemic racism and things like that. And so when I see your policy analysis questions, I'm also thinking about how do you, it's almost like the impact of a decision right now and what's the impact of current state. So is there any consideration of remedying historic harms and inequities as you make policies now, like reversing the historical trends that have gotten us to where we are versus kind of thinking about the current state as like a neutral state?
That has been the approach. If we find something like that, we haven't found anything like that, at least based on the data that we have available and the analysis we've been able to conduct, we haven't found anything, but that was the approach, was to not just change the language, but also look at reversing some of those harmful impacts as well. We're not proposing any because we didn't find anything, but it doesn't mean we might find something in the future, and we'll have the same approach then.
Okay, so you're actively looking into that, though.
We are.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. So for timing and next steps of this project, we're currently in this analysis and review, looking at all of the different elements and topic areas with each of the other boards and commissions, presenting some of our findings with an analysis, continuing to conduct more analysis, working with a consultant on particularly like the disparate impacts analysis. And then eventually we're going to get to a point of presenting some of the draft language to council committees over the next couple months, and then putting everything together into a draft early next year. And ultimately, we're hoping to adopt the comprehensive plan around August or September next year, but there's a lot of steps before we get there. But that's kind of where we're at, is kind of those initial steps of working through everything. So getting back to the questions that I had for the board tonight, how do you want to handle going through those? You want to just go through each one?
Sure.
So going with the first question, does the board have potential changes to the approach that my team is taking with the comprehensive plan? Is there something you feel like maybe we're missing? And if you can't think of something tonight, please feel free to email me after tonight too. I know a lot of there's a lot of information to take in, especially if you're not familiar with comprehensive plans. So if you maybe think of something later tonight or later this week, I can give Dale my email and you all can contact me at a later time too. Okay, moving to the second question. Is there other information that would be useful for an equity analysis? I know I kind of covered it broadly, but is there something that you might be seeing in your own work or work going on in other cities that you think the city of Issaquah might be able to benefit from?
So I have a possible comment there. I don't have any answers, but I know that issues around accessibility for folks with disabilities is a big thing that often gets overlooked. Mm-hmm. So thinking as much as you can center on that in relation to this work, and then also issues around intersectionality. I think that is something that a lot of different groups are trying to understand how to address more systematically. Mm-hmm. And so just kind of thinking about how that can be factored into your analyses.
Okay, that's a good point. Anything else? Okay. On the last question, are there other recommendations that we can take to the Planning Policy Commission in terms of this work, or even just thinking about the long-range vision for the city? I think one thing I might add is, as we're kind of looking through drafting each of the different elements, we're making sure to incorporate, where it's relevant, the narrative of the importance of equity analysis as we're looking at the long-range vision, not just for land use and housing, but for all the different elements. Okay.
I might have one thing I could add there, especially with climate resilience becoming one of the topics, and thinking about longer range impacts from climate change. Mm-hmm. There might be new inequities that
difficulty hearing the question.
Sorry, I'll speak up. Can you hear me now?
Thank you so much.
I want to talk in this direction.
Oh, great. Yeah, keep looking at the screen. Yeah, I was just bringing up the potential new inequities that might come up with climate change related impacts, which we might not be experiencing today, but especially when you're thinking of the comprehensive plan that spans 20 years, what those might look like, in the future. If that might be something to consider, if you haven't already looked into that.
I know our sustainability group, they're conducting a vulnerability assessment as it comes to related to climate change. And they're looking at the broader impacts to the community, whether it's intended or unintended, and even preparedness as it relates to natural disasters in the future, and how our population or different population groups might be prepared or not prepared. And so hopefully we'll be addressing some of that. Because the comprehensive plan is such a kind of a higher level policy look at everything, it might not get into that level of detail of saying how we're going to be fixing it, but saying that we want to. But the update to our climate action plan or some of our implementation plans might incorporate a lot of how we might be addressing a lot of that. That's a great point. Thank you.
And if it's helpful to know, the Issaquah Climate Action Plan is going to be coming up for its review point in the coming year. And so David Reedy from Sustainability loves coming to the Equity Board, and I would assume that they will come back with that as they consider their update as well.
Okay.
I had one more question.
Yeah.
And, could you go back to the slide where you had sort of the 4 equity questions? Or maybe 3.
The 3.
Yeah, I was just curious how you came up with these 3 questions for your analysis.
We, so as part of our staff training, these questions actually came up early on for some of us who went through equity training. And so these kind of resonated to me to make sure, if we can't have their equity framework to use for the full comprehensive plan, we want to at least make sure as we're having the policy discussions, have these policies available to us and discuss them actively with our planning policy commission.
Thank you.
I think one comment that I had, so I think from what you shared, it seems like there's been a lot of thought and equity considerations going into it, which is really, I'm impressed. I think I often find in doing this work that it's in the details where things fall down. And so I guess, I know like you've talked about like who wasn't in the room when engagement initially happened, and trying to make sure you go back and grab those people so they are able to contribute and provide feedback. So at that level of engagement, how are you thinking about making sure that you do get those folks? Like you're inviting them, they're coming, or you're going to them to meet them where they're at, thinking about the language, translation needs, all of those things. And I also know like this is pretty, like the content and the discussion is pretty, it might be advanced, and so it might take a while to bring folks along to be able to contribute meaningfully. And so I'm just wondering if that's all part of your plan as you do, your recurring kind of cycles of engagement.
I would say there's 2 levels to kind of address. So that first is kind of making sure that the staff understand the importance of a lot of the work, and not just what it means, but also how to come up with different strategies to have inclusive engagement. Because, traditionally you have your survey, and then you have a meeting that anybody's invited to, and then you go to city council and adopt it. We're trying to move away from that as our template. And we're trying to make it a much more, I would say, tailored approach depending on the project, because sometimes it's a capital project where you're building a road in a specific area. And so traditionally engineers are going to look at it as, well, we're just building the road. What's the equity consideration? Well, now we have to walk them through it, or help them at least understand what does that actually mean. It's not just the people that are impacted. It's also people who are not impacted, the people who use the road or not using the road, and going beyond that. Because I could go through as much effort as I can to make sure the plan is as inclusive as possible. But if I'm not supported by the other staff working that's more direct responsible for the project, it's going to be kind of a wasted effort. So the staff is kind of the important part of making sure that each of the projects, as they're getting updated, makes it more inclusive. The other part is just exploring, what does that mean? Who are the groups that we didn't engage, or how did we engage them in the first place? Who do we need to also bring to the table and have the conversations? Who who needs to be brought along and be, educated, at least technically, to understand enough to provide meaningful feedback. And sometimes it's not a broad community conversation. Sometimes it's a smaller forum of individuals in the community who you kind of teach about the topic and then pose the policy question. So it kind of is a tailored approach depending on the project. And so I think as the city expands some of this work and tries to include more of these conversations, we're going to continue to learn how best to make this more inclusive. But as you know, it's still a learning process for a lot of us.
Yeah. No, that's really helpful to know how you're approaching it. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Are there any other questions? Okay. Well, like I said, if there's anything else, please feel free to email me. Thank you for having me to present on this. I'm going to turn it over back to Dale.
Yeah, great. So Stephen, I will give folks time to follow up with me in the next couple of weeks. If you have any additional thoughts for Stephen, especially if, like me, your first reaction maybe isn't your fully baked thought and you have some thoughts a few days, a few hours from now, we'll make sure that, as you saw from the timeline, this is something that's stretching into well into the coming year. And so we've got some time to think.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to stick around to listen on Holly's presentation.
Thank you.
Great. And Holly, would you like me to share slides or would you like to share them? Awesome. Awesome.
Well, first of all, I will introduce myself. I'm Holly Keaton. I'm the city planner with the city. I do current planning, so slightly different planning area than Stephen has just explained to us very well. And I'm going to kind of cross over with some of the information that he's provided. So thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And I just have to say, this group needs to really give themselves credit because this is the 6th city I've worked for and the first equity board that I have seen engaged in really making efforts. And so that's something that everyone really needs to be really proud of, I think. Okay, Dale, did you give me that access to share?
Were you able to share? Actually, you should. It should be right in the upper corner by me. Not yet. I think if it gives you a hard time, I'm also happy to drive.
One more time.
There we go. That's looking
Okay.
promising. Awesome.
All right, so I'm just going to give kind of a high-level overview of current planning and how the equity framework plays into the work that we do and give mainly a specific example of how it's come up in the past couple of years and the efforts that we recognize since the equity framework has been put together still need work. And so that has been really actually incredibly meaningful for the team to go through the equity framework and kind of ask ourselves questions and start the conversation. Are we doing things here that we are, aren't we doing things? Are we doing things? What can we be doing? And actually, the conversation has just started to kind of evolve in the past few months. So I feel like we're just at the very beginning in current planning. So it's kind of exciting to see where we're going to go from here. So current planning, our role is, it's pretty cut and dry. We administer code. So all of the things that Stephen was talking about is the creation code. So that's the policy making. And, you know, for lack of a better analogy, he makes the sausage, we serve it. So all of the council meetings and the planning policy committee, all of those things are where the policies are developed. Once those policies are developed, they're implemented by the council adopting the code standards. And so the code standards come to the current planning team, and we take projects in and talk to, citizens, and we look at the code and we say, what does the code say? So it's not quite as creative as Stephen gets to be. So at a very high level, that's what we do. There are obviously areas that come up where the code hasn't addressed certain things. And so we have identified that that's, one area where we need to pay attention, where these holes are in policy, if decisions we're making in the process where policy isn't addressing it, if there's any sort of equity issue being created out of those decisions. So how we do our job is, to kind of recap, it's basically customer service and project management using the code standards that we have. So the difference between what current planners do and what long-range planners do, again, very high level. Stephen kind of gave you a very deep explanation, so I don't really feel like I need to spend too much time on it, but they work through the process or the creation of the policies that we then implement. So they do the amendments and the analysis of the codes that have been created and amend them based on how they're working through the comp plan. So to reiterate, comp plan and municipal code, they need to align with each other. If they don't, that can create lots of problems.
Who creates the municipal code?
The municipal code is created through long range and current planning combined. It goes to city council for final adoption. And so it's a lot of the policymakers putting input into what's going into the municipal code.
Prior to it going to city council for development regulations that current planners mostly use, it'll go through planning policy commission first.
Mm-hmm. So just to kind of introduce the entire team, you have the planning managers, which are Stephen and Christian Geitz. I don't know if you've had a chance to meet him on this board. I'm sure you will at some point in time. He's my direct supervisor. Other current planners are myself, along with Doug Yormick, who is our environmental planner, Valerie Porter, who has actually, in my mind, kind of helped bridge the gap in equity because she is playing two roles. She is a long-range planner and a current planner, and we don't have any other planners who are doing that here in Issaquah. And I think that is a really important skill set and kind of mind frame to come from, because you're seeing not only how the policies are being created, but how they're being implemented, in the project process. Mm-hmm. And then we have Dan Martinez, who is an associate planner, and Emily Adams, who is also an associate planner. Our long-range planners are Kristen Leeson, who has been with the city for quite a long time, 14 years?
21.
21, well. Oh. Wow, okay. I thought that was it at first, and I was like, is it really that long? No. And then Valerie again, and then we have Thomas Aldres, who is mainly transportation-focused planning. So equity considerations in policy development, when we're talking through this at the current planning level, we're really asking ourselves, how does equity play a role in what we do? And so we had to kind of take a step back and when asking this question and say, this is something that has to be addressed at the policy level because of how our role is built. If equity is not considered in creating the policy, then it's going to filter through the projects. And, we have seen that, as you were mentioning earlier, in development throughout history, we've seen that occurring. And so I think, it's really important that this conversation is occurring because as the
long-range plan is being created and the policies are being created that will trickle down to current planning and into the municipal code, and we can hopefully bridge those gaps. So one area that we have recognized in the last couple of years that needed some work was our notification process. For most land use projects, we do public noticing. In the typical noticing process, and this comes from the state level. So most cities just adopt what the state says you have to do, and we leave it at that. In the last couple of years, we've changed that process in Issaquah to try to get the word out to a greater amount of citizens and interested parties. So we have changed it from what the state says is a 300-foot radius from a project site to a 500-foot radius. And we've also made the efforts to not only, the state says you have to notice property owners, we're now also doing the work to notice renters and lessees as well.
That's nice.
Is there a question?
Sorry, I was very excited about that.
Oh. Good, I'm happy you're excited about that. It is actually proving to reach a lot more people. And I think that we're going to see some really positive impacts from that. And I think that just getting the word out to more people is going to engage more people. And I think, you know, just personally speaking, 300 feet from a site, depending on the lot sizes, is not always capturing a lot of people.
No.
Sometimes it is. It depends on where you are. Like if you're in an area where the lot sizes are very small, then obviously you're going to capture more people. But. Okay, so what do we need to do moving forward? So this is one example we've noticed in the last couple of years, and it kind of opened our eyes to where we were in process.
We have a question. Oh. Apologies. I didn't want to interrupt you, but I want to make sure that Lucrecia gets to ask the question where we're at.
Okay.
Thank you, Dale. This is Lucrecia Choto speaking. So I guess my question is around, I understand that notifying within 500 feet involves having like signage, correct?
Correct.
Is that signage in other languages, and or is there a way to add like a QR code to where the information that is being announced is in other languages? One. And two, is there any effort being made to identify grassroots pages that are run within neighborhoods that could be impacted? I don't know if you have the people power to do that, but it is one way to get information out to people that would otherwise not even know what some of the signage is, right? Like you could drive by it and not realize that it's intended for your consumption and for your processing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I do touch a little bit on that in the future in my presentation, but I am really happy that you brought that up because this is one of the exact topics that has come out of the equity framework is how can we incorporate a better approach in the process that we're following, because obviously, you know, policy is carried out through process, and process is something that current planners have the ability to adjust. But you ask and bring up a very good point. It's the staff ability to do those things. And so we are currently assessing how we can reach a greater audience, and the translation piece is one of the primary aspects that has come up. So in one of my slides coming up, you'll see that next steps, one of the first things is to assess how we can potentially have notices in both English and Spanish, or possibly another language that may be able to communicate to a greater number of people within the community. And then for the signs, that's a great point. Notices in the past were not always required to have signage. That is another change that was made with the new notification process in the last 2 years. So now if any project requires notification, the site does require signage. In terms of your question about grassroots, we have not made publications in any grassroots publications. Later on in my presentation, I do note that one of the key aspects that current planning would like to do in terms of improving our processes is work with this board for ideas such as that. I mean, that's an excellent idea, and it potentially wouldn't cost the city that much more than what our current noticing process costs. So I appreciate the note. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we can just pause here for a moment if there are any other questions. Okay. Thank you for pointing out the question.
Of course.
I didn't see the hand up.
No, I have to give credit to Monica because I saw a flash as I was note taking. So team effort here.
Okay, so coordination, another aspect that we have noticed that we can improve upon is greater coordination with long-range planning. Stephen does a really great job of reaching out to us on specific questions. However, there is probably room for us to have more coordination with long-range planning in the process of creating the comp plan and also getting more feedback from the planner who has a foot in both worlds to see how current planning can potentially improve processes. So continuing efforts in current planning, as I mentioned, we're currently discussing the equity framework and doing a deeper dive into how we can better engage the community and how we need to prioritize our engagement. And ideally, when we can kind of get a better grasp on how we need to engage better, it's always best practice to have data that we can measure, right? So trying to get enough communication with the community and assess how they are experiencing the engagement, and then going back and kind of seeing where we need to make some changes in the future. Some areas that need to be prioritized to bridge some of these gaps are perceived as being zoning amendments and reform to bridge the gaps where there are some equity issues, more focus on public transportation, and then monitoring and evaluation of the policies we're using, which is built into what Stephen does as he has expressed. Okay, so the efforts that have been made, I already addressed briefly the noticing process. So again, required to do 300 feet of a site and required to notice property owners. The city has been it was codified in the amendments that were adopted June 1st. However, practices were adjusted prior to that. So now land use planners who do project review are doing 500 feet from the site and doing owners, lessees, renters within 500 feet of that site.
Holly, can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
So around this notification process, so it sounds like there's efforts to communicate these changes publicly to a larger swath of people. How do they express their concerns? Is that kind of that one, come y'all, express your concerns, or are there, I'm trying to think for folks with language issues or something like that, how are they able to effectively express their concerns and participate in that part of the process?
That's an excellent question. The noticing process has a timeline built into it. it's typically 14 days, and the notice is for comments to come to the project planner, and that can be through phone call or email. We do have the ability to call for translation services. However, if anyone has ever used that in an office setting, it's really cumbersome and creates a lot of weight for the person who is requesting translation services. So that is another area of discussion for how do we improve that. I'm guessing some of you have been in that scenario. I'll speak really personally. I have been in that scenario, and it's really disheartening because you can feel the, for lack of a better word, frustration from the person you're trying to help because they're having to wait so much longer to get, the assistance or be able to provide input on something because of the wait time for a translator through the translation services. So thank you for asking. So the current examples that are coming to mind during this discussion and current planning are, number one, translation services at public meetings. Just to give you some context on how the meetings are run, we send out notices. Usually that is about a week to 10 days prior to a meeting to have translation services. The discussion has kind of been around doing something for maybe like an RSVP notice so that we know what language services might be needed for a specific meeting so we can have language services on site, kind of like, what you're already doing for your board. Another topic that came up is creating a development equity questionnaire that is a requirement for developers to have to fill out when they're providing a project proposal. And in my mind, that is something that we would be developing with this board and greater coordination with long-range planning and their policy development. Are there any questions about any of that?
One quick question around, translation, it's great that that's being considered. Is there also like accessibility guidelines for folks who might have physical challenges to get to the meetings and considering what needs they might have?
Consideration in terms of accessibility for where we have the meetings. We typically hold meetings in buildings that are accessible.
Okay.
Other than that, we don't have like, we haven't talked about translation services for sign language or anything like that, but obviously that's part of this larger conversation. And I did want to, thank you for bringing that up. I did want to touch on your comment from earlier about ADA and accessibility. In the worlds of development, the way that is addressed is through the building code, which is IBC and IRC. And so those are codes that are nationally utilized. And then each jurisdiction has their own amendments to the building code. I don't want to speak too much on the building code because I'm not an expert in that area, but that is primarily the area where accessibility is addressed. I will say, just from my experience in other cities, I do see that we could do more there because in other land use codes I've worked with, there is carryover between the building code and the land use code to ensure, more eyes are on these aspects. So I think that is something that could be improved upon in our policies. Okay, so next steps kind of just echo exactly what I was.
I have a question about the meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Just the goal of the meetings are?
So the goal of the meeting for a project is for the community to come and hear what a developer is proposing for a site and, give their feedback and provide any concerns and actually have the opportunity to even ask questions of the developer right there in that meeting.
And the developer is contracted to, the developer is somebody outside who's going to build a building, correct?
Correct.
I'm just trying to get grassroots here. And so basics. So the developer has no stake in the community agreeing or not agreeing. Yes?
Not necessarily. One might think that. A lot of times a developer is also part of the community, so it depends on the project.
Is that something we look for in a developer? Is that they are a community member?
Development is mostly guided by the market. So if somebody is interested in developing a piece of property, the city doesn't play any type of role in seeking a developer. We stay in our lane, and if somebody is interested, they come to us and we tell them that's not allowed, that is allowed. Let's help you figure out how you can do that and remain in compliance with the land use code, which is what I would focus on. And then building will help them figure out how they can remain in compliance with the building code and so on. So the city doesn't play any role in who develops a property. The only role that we play is in assessing their proposal for compliance with the standards that we've adopted through the city council.
And are there standards around equity?
That's what we're trying to create more of in the code. So going back to Stephen's presentation, his policies help create the standards that go into the municipal code, and the municipal code standards are what the planners review plans against. So when we're looking at a developer's proposal, we look at their plan set and we look at the municipal code 200, 300 times, looking at each standard, to make sure that they're meeting the standards that are outlined in that council adopted code.
Right.
Typically what you'll find in the code is like the building has to be this high, there needs to be a distance between buildings, something more specific. The equity or analysis for equity within the code is usually around what were the outcomes that resulted from having those standards in place. Is that what we intended it to meet our vision? If not, then how do we adjust it? So it's not specifically saying we have, it's difficult to say we have code specific to equity, primarily because it's more technical than a lot of the policies.
And that, I understand that. What I'm having a hard time getting my head around is you have developers talking to the community, who the community is going to think is you.
It kind of goes to the market piece that that is important as part of this, because they don't want to build something where they're going to huge the resistance from the community. So that's kind of, it's not just for the community to come out and express their pushback concerns with the project. It's also for the developer to hear the concerns from the community as well, to see if they can address that. So while, to get to your point, there's no obligation for them to actually do it, they also want to take that into consideration of, is this going to be profitable? And if there's community resistance to this project, there's a risk on that profit. So there's that consideration in that conversation as well.
And just kind of to back up a little bit, the items that we're kind of assessing in terms of how do we create greater equity in process goes back to that equity questionnaire. That would be a required document for developers to fill out for whatever their project proposal may be. So they will actually be having to assess something similar to the equity framework for their projects and provide, their feedback to how they're creating an equitable project in their application packet. That isn't something that we have created yet. That is just something that we are discussing could potentially be an effort that we require of developers.
You guys are doing a lot of work. It's a very much appreciated.
Yeah. You are doing a lot of work as well, but I'm sure it took quite a lot of time to create the equity framework. So continued efforts, again, primarily where our focus is figuring out how we can get translation services as part of our meetings. That seems to be just a no-brainer. That's where we should be kicking off greater efforts, and then also noticing in more than one language. Increasing engagement is another effort that needs to be considered. So most of our engagement at the current planning level, we've kind of just discussed. It's these neighborhood type meetings where the community can come and ask questions of the developer and of staff and get an idea of what the project is going to be. Somebody made a comment earlier, which really resonated with me, which is meet people where they are. That is, just to give you a little background, I used to work in mental health before I was a planner, and that is crucial to building trust, is going to where people are and not making them come to you. And so that is something that needs to be assessed from a current planning standpoint. We are very, I guess you could say, rigid in how we provide these meetings because we are doing it based on what the code says we need to do, right? Mm-hmm. So going back to that piece of current planning, our life is run by the municipal code. So these meetings that I am telling you about, they are outlined in the code how they are to be run. So that's where the policy piece comes into play, right? So earlier on in the very beginning of my presentation, I tried to emphasize how important the equity piece is at the policy level for current planners because it has that trickle down effect. And so the code tells me the way that I need to have a public meeting is to do A, B, C, and D. And I need to make sure that the applicant and I am being compliant with those A, B, C, and D items. That doesn't mean you can't do more, but it means that you need to, remain within the confines of what the council has said needs to be done. So the target is, obviously representing the community. Sorry, I lost my spot there. Representing the community, and to represent the community better, we need to know the community better. And that goes back to wider communication, greater engagement, different types of engagement, providing notices and communication in more than one language, and all of these things working together to really reach the community.
Holly, we have a question from Lucrezia.
Yes, hello, this is Lucrezia Choto speaking again. Holly, my question is there a method to capture as things need to be changed within the code, how that code will be changed? And will there be times when that code can be revised? And will that process be informed to the people who are engaging, who do have these language barriers?
Another great question. Thank you. There is a process very similar to the process that Stephen was mentioning earlier. It hasn't always been done on a yearly basis, but with new management, that's the goal. So we are looking at, so we just amended the entire land use code. It was adopted on June 1st. And moving forward, throughout the year, we are keeping a spreadsheet of the policies that come up while staff is doing project review that are problematic. And so then we have weekly staff meetings where we discuss, why this specific policy or standard is problematic and how it can potentially be changed. And the goal is to have annual, I'll say not minor, but minor compared to the entire overhaul that we just did. So annual updates for those problematic standards that we're tracking throughout the year.
And just to clarify, Holly, sorry, is you're taking feedback as the process is taking place and implementing that feedback from the community into the process, correct?
So what's happening is we are having conversations with the community. So typically this would be like homeowners or developers or people in a community where there's a development happening, and we're getting feedback about why something has or how something has played out through that development process. I'm sorry, I don't know if you can see. I can't tell if you can see me or not. So then we're making notes internally and keeping track of that, as well as talking about that in a staff capacity, and also assessing from a staff capacity how we can make better standards for the next rendition. And to a lesser degree, that also incorporates Stephen's group. But I feel like once it gets to the municipal code, which is our primary document, it's already gone through so much work with long range that we don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know that we engage you as much on the amendments of the land use code once it's already passed by the council.
Yeah, once it gets to council, it's pretty much in its final form, but we have and will continue to have a lot of these in-depth conversations in terms of like, what did the current planners hear in terms of why this is an issue? What is the issue actually at hand? And come up with alternatives to either what the code says or the process that we go in place with implementing the code.
Thank you to both of you.
Okay, so how do we seek more equity in current planning? Obviously, more research is necessary. We need to assess past practices, which in the example that I provided earlier this evening is what we've been trying to do. So just that key example of noticing and getting the communication out to the community, we had to take a step back and ask ourselves at the most basic level, where can we improve processes? And that was the low-hanging fruit for sure. So assessing how we can improve that process and thinking what is actually practical for staff and financially for us to do to reach a greater greater level of the community, and put that into practice. And so then coming back and analyzing if those changes have made significant improvements. And obviously, as I mentioned, we just started that process this past year. And so, I feel like we're already seeing greater input and engagement from the community as time goes on. So let's say after a year of carrying out this new process, we should have a much better understanding of if those changes were successful, and if we've reached a greater number of community members. And then moving forward from, taking it beyond just the noticing portion of our work, our policy or our process work, figuring out really where the priorities lie for the community and where we can create improvements in our process that reflects the community's needs and wants. Okay, so how did the equity framework questions impact our ideas and thoughts as current planners about inclusive planning? So as I touched upon earlier, it's very obvious that through the process, we need to be connecting more on a greater level with the community. That's the key, communication and meeting people where they are and having, that relationship built. And without reaching out, we can't really build a relationship. So then we're not really improving the trust. Once the relationship is built, obviously there's more of a sense of camaraderie, and city staff hopefully can be with that more as an ally. And we would like to utilize whatever communication is brought to us from a greater percentage of the population to really foster a sense of belonging for everyone, and ask ourselves how we can reconsider stereotypes that each of us have as individuals and stereotypes that we have developed as a group. And, again, just taking a step back and assessing our actions and reactions and asking ourselves, whose voices are being represented in the work that we're doing. These are all questions that came up through the equity framework and in the discussion with the current planning group. And again, I just thank this group for creating the platform from which these groups within the city can start to have these conversations and think more deeply about these topics. Okay, so at a minimum, what does inclusive planning look like? Sorry about that. At a minimum, more community participation and engagement, that's key. That is currently where we're placing our efforts. Stepping it up and going to the next phase, collecting and analyzing the data from the new process of notification and engaging this board to really get some brain power from you all in the work that you do and giving us ideas and how we can provide greater equity through our processes. I feel like I've already gotten some ideas tonight, so that's exciting, and I thank you guys for being so open. And then providing meaningful action. So setting specific goals, figuring out what those goals are that reflect the desires of the community, and then engaging with stakeholders such as this board to ensure that we're changing processes to reflect those desires. So the current planning team had a general assessment of the framework. I just wanted to give kind of a high-level overview. When we were given the equity framework, the discussion was kind of very much focused on this needs to be addressed at the policy level. However, again, going back to the beginning of the presentation, we did realize that there is a space for us to focus on process and how we are creating greater equity in the processes that we carry out and that we practice. I wanted to provide a few examples of what other communities and jurisdictions are doing in the area. So Tacoma has a workforce policy plan put in place for equity. They've also created an Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility, and they are streamlining processes for city employees to request reasonable accommodations. Some of you may already know, King County has developed, there's a process of developing an equity and social justice strategic plan, and they are shifting their practices away from being reactive to being proactive, and they are trying to balance vision through their actions with measurable objectives. In Hillsborough, Oregon, they're trying to exemplify and instill diversity, equity, and inclusion as an essential part internally and externally in their policymaking. And they're trying to ensure carryover policies within the delivery of city services. So that's kind of the point that is the connection between what Stephen does in long range and what I do in current planning. So that's the delivery of city services. How do you create more equity within the process that is delivered to the community? And the city council there has made racial equity a citywide priority. So I think when we reflect on Issaquah and what Issaquah is really trying to do and the priorities that Issaquah is putting forth recently, we can see that I think we're right up there with some of these other jurisdictions in the efforts that are being made. And I see that we're just going to continue making efforts in this area.
Oh yeah, hand up from Tony.
Hey, Holly, just a curiosity question. Does this slide particularly here, does it encompass what all the cities that are in the kind of general area are doing, or is it just kind of basically just your research or just on these particular areas?
This is just a few from my research. No, it does not encompass all of them.
Thank you.
Okay, so in summary, one of the key notes is the struggle that current planners face in terms of equity is mainly ensuring that we're engaged enough with the long range planning team to ensure that we have a voice in the policy making stage. without overstepping our bounds. I'll try not to step on your toes, Stephen. But, ensuring that we're communicating across divisions to help each other, more brains are better than one, right? So creating greater equity in the policy development stage is going to trickle down and create greater equity in the development of services. As I've noted, the equity framework has been a really great jumping off place for our group to start this discussion and really start asking ourselves some difficult questions. So again, I thank this board for creating that platform from which that discussion can be had. And thank you for having me. That's it.
Do folks have questions for Holly or Stephen? Lorna.
Holly, I have one question. On your slide, equity and planning model, where you have research, identity, and prioritize and act, I'm wondering if there's any space to add one more thing around reflection. And so in the sense that in your other slide on inclusive planning, you talk about assess actions and reactions and whose voices are not being represented. So I'm wondering if maybe another part of your planning module having reflection would allow for creating or getting, to reflect on the process, on what happened, what people are saying in the moment. Because I feel like a couple of months ago, we heard from community members where they talk about not being heard. And so if we kind of put that reaction there, or maybe whose voice, how, when, so that to me, it feels like it would be a nice complete circle, so that when the next time you go back to research, you have this reaction and a reflection of what happened. And so you can add that to your new strategy practices and coming up in a new policy planning kind of situation. So just something to kind of close the loop, but something a little bit more immediate.
Yes, thank you.
And I'll note, Holly, you were writing, but I saw that Lucretia put some thumbs up while Lorna was sharing her recommendation.
Great feedback, thank you.
Lucretia has a question.
Thank you again for taking my my comment. One of the ideas that came up while you were speaking with regards to my question around reaching people who have possible language barriers is the idea of maybe in the meantime, while you figure out something that's more inclusive, is to have a one-time translation of some sort of wording like, for other languages, click or take a picture of this QR code and including in that signage the QR code that goes to your main site that has the information. And I believe that all of the pages that are city related have a translator at the top right corner. And that way, while we're in this process of creating policy that is inclusive, a process that is more inclusive, etc., we use this idea in the meantime until we come up with something that's maybe more sophisticated, right? But that in the immediacy addresses the issue, right? So just a QR code, to translate in like the main languages of the city of Issaquah, like, or other languages, information in other languages. Here's this QR code, pops it to your website. Your website has the translator at the top. People can translate whatever it is that they need. That's just an idea. Thank you.
Excellent idea. Thank you. Another question.
Any other questions for Holly?
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Well, I will just say I'm really impressed with the thoughtfulness that you both have, brought to how you're planning for more equity and inclusion in your processes. And I'm really surprised at how dynamic this code policy and code is. I usually think of like code and, you know, as being kind of a stale thing. And so it's really impressive to see how you're constantly looking for ways to improve it. So I really appreciate that approach. Thank you.
If we don't have good code, our jobs are much more.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah, feel free to stick around for our last item if you'd like. But yeah, really grateful to have you here tonight. And I know similarly we'll be following up. Holly, you outlined a few different ways that we might engage with you as your team gets closer on deciding some of the different actions that you want to take. And so we're excited to welcome you back and be partners in whatever way we can. Yeah, awesome.
Okay, so now I think we're on to our other business and announcements. And so I think Dale is going to lead us in a conversation around a glossary of terms. I do want to note we're about 15 minutes off of schedule. So, and we didn't have a break. So I do want to check with folks to see if it's okay. Dale, like how much time do you think we need here?
We might not need more than 15 minutes. This was just a sort of thing that floated at the end of our meeting, and we didn't come to any sort of clear next step that we wanted to take. And so I wanted to make sure we brought it back and had it as an agenda item at this meeting so we can get clearer on what it is that we want. I think per your note on the minutes and like, is this where we landed? I think I had a similar, where did we land? Thank you both.
Thank you.
And so it could take 15 minutes and we could feel like we have a clear path forward to continue discussion. Or if folks feel like this is gonna be longer and we wanna move to extend the meeting tonight, we can. I'll take a break now. I'm open to either.
So are folks okay if we push forward for 15 minutes and see where we're at?
Cool.
Okay, let's do it.
Great, let's do it. Love these thumbs up emojis, Teams meeting emojis. Oh yeah, oh, weird, it did remain on there, and I don't know if I can undo that. Let's see if I try to share. If I try to share, it might.
You might be able
Yep.
to.
And then I stop.
Yeah.
Hey, we figured it out. But Holly is still in this meeting,
You can also
although
probably take her out of the meeting. You can.
Monica, you are asking me to do some high-level technology. I'm not too worried about her closed computer being in the meeting. So I wanted to bring, there are no materials to go with this item in other business. At last month's meeting, we, as part of our other business last month, had, I think, a pretty great conversation towards the end of that meeting around both this piece on what training is required for board and commission members, and also what materials do you all feel, and I personally also feel, do you all feel should be present on the city website and or in some other place that demonstrates our city's commitment to equity? And so one of the things that came up as just some context was, do people even know the difference between equity and equality? And have we made that statement clear that the city is in favor of equity? And so I wanted to put an agenda item on here for us to talk about that and talk about potentially the creation of some sort of glossary of terms or some sort of commitment defining equity publicly. Do we want to make a recommendation? And if so, do we want to have staff, AKA me, look further into what exists in other cities and other jurisdictions? So I wanted to open for discussion. I know it's not the neatest agenda item, but hopefully one that we can talk about for the next 10 minutes or so and feel like we've got a clear plan on what we want to do about this.
I think it would be a good idea to see what other, I'm sorry, I should have raised my hand. I just started talking. I think it would be a good idea for us to actually ascertain what other cities are doing just to see what they're, I'm not saying we have to follow their model or follow their example, but at least see what they are doing, especially as we look to our sister cities that are close by. It would be nice to also
I
incorporate
agree.
some.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay, good Lorna. Go ahead, step in.
I agree. I'm just also thinking about Holly's comment that she's worked in 6 cities and this is the first place that she's seen equity work done. So I'm wondering how many other cities actually have done this work and have this information. I think we can definitely look at what other people are doing, but I think in the meantime, defining, because we are already knee deep in this. So it feels like we might act a little bit now and then do more later on. But I think at the minimum, we should do a little bit more concrete definition of what, and I don't think it should be coming from us, by the way. I think it's something that should be coming from city council and the mayor's area. I mean, I know we are part of that group, but just saying the city is doing equity because this is what is needed. Because I think what I feel like I also heard is a lack of understanding as to why. And so maybe what is equity and what is the opposite, right? What is not equity? Because I had heard in a previous meeting a definition of equality that they were using as equity.
Yeah, I'm also wondering if we might actually broaden the scope even more to gather information on what the definitions for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are beyond just cities, in organizations, in other settings. If the intention is indeed to educate people, including maybe some of us, myself, maybe there's other places outside of cities that might be potentially ahead in sort of thinking about this more deeply.
I threw into the chat the visual that we talked about when we all first got together in the equity board, and we kind of talked about, okay, what is the difference between equity and equality, and how does that look? I think something like this is a good link on, let's say, the city website to really explain the difference between equity and equality. And I think I can't remember who brought up something in that meeting, but I remember one of the things and themes that came out from that meeting was that um, equality had its time in which it was needed, but why equity is needed now. And I'm not sure if that article that I put there actually talks about that, but it just really does definitely visually represent the difference between equity and equality and why equity is more needed for today. Because we had to get to equality first to get to equity, in my personal opinion.
I think in addition to, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, equality, those terms, we're hearing other phrases come up, and it's, like marginalized groups. What else? I think I heard in another meeting, someone said normal people, which to me is a little bit harmful. And so just thinking about words that we also may use that we shouldn't use, and kind of bringing attention to words like that, or phrases that we should stop using. I think that might be something to consider in scope for a glossary, like of terms to use and those not to use. And this might be even a bigger scope, but I'm thinking around, so equity, we know that there's a lot of dimensions of equity. So there's race, gender, sexual orientation, ability, disability. And this might start getting into policy land, but like, how do we want to approach that and prioritize, different groups? Because it's really hard to hold all of those dimensions when you do like an equity analysis. Like if there's a couple that maybe we should prioritize first, and other groups would kind of be follow along because we're focused on those that are most furthest from opportunity. So starting to think about that, but that could be more of a policy position versus a definition.
Other thoughts?
Maybe one more, I don't know how useful it might be, but thinking about what the potential benefits are for all of us as a community when we bring into consideration these topics. Because I think not everyone's on the same page about why should the city care about these things and why is it important? I think all of us might agree that yes, this is clearly important. But, you know, if there are ways to really communicate, like here is the community's benefit, these are the things that we would all benefit if we consider these more thoughtfully. Might be another.
I think that's like ripe for a community conversation or something, or maybe during welcome week or, you know, something like that. That's a great idea.
Thanks.
I want to make sure that we've got other thoughts out here on this brief table of time we have remaining. A couple of things that this makes me think. So I totally hear both looking at other cities, and I think, Karthik, your point is really well made on not just cities, but what are other entities that aren't cities doing? What resources do they have? Because a lot of the resources seem to be buried behind a few walls of clicking. I mean, I know we've got some school district experts on here. I tend to think schools are often a few steps ahead. And so I think that is a good resource potentially to look to as well, to see what resources are available through maybe not necessarily just our local school district, but broadly what are schools putting out there. And then I heard, Lorna, embedded in what you shared, this should come from the mayor, you know, and so I think what I'd like to do is carry this forward and get a sense from her on if she wants us to move forward with creating this tool. And then we can go from there. I also say somewhat off topic, Monica was in the room when we discussed this, but I do think I will likely be working on designing sort of a new board and commission member orientation that will occur as new board members come online, which happens in late spring every year. And so we'll think, I'm keeping in mind our conversation from last month around what should be in that orientation. So does that seem like a good next step for this group for me to carry this forward a bit internally to see? Okay.
And one of the reasons I say is coming from the board of people, primarily people of color, is one thing. I mean, yeah, we have a voice, but I think it's more powerful when it comes from the leaders who said that this is a priority. So it's continuing on with the message that this is a priority versus the equity board said that you should do that. And so I think it's just giving it more weight and saying that we as a city have decided that this is important work and this is why we're doing it. And when we use the word marginalized, underrepresented, equity, inclusiveness, this is what we mean by that.
Yep. Heard. Loud and clear. Lucrezia?
Thank you, Dale. Yeah, I just wanted to point out that in the chat, I've shared what is currently being published through the Association of Washington Cities with regards to equity resources that are being implemented in the Pacific Northwest.
Thank you for sharing that one. So I've got it bookmarked on my computer.
Great.
Okay, any last thoughts? That's all I wanted to make sure that we talked about.
And I'll take a note to myself to also get some of the resources from my previous employer, which was Lawrence Berkeley Lab in California. And I work with some folks at UW that I know are involved in DEIA as well, DEIA, DEIB. So they might have some resources too, so try to get some of that.
Great.
Right, and Dale, just real quickly, there is time to continue sending you information that we have. I'm currently not with a computer, but on my computer I have other resources that I would like to share as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. I will not be following up with this tomorrow. So definitely over the course of the next week, please feel free to send other resources that you come across. And I'll send out an email reminder to everyone next week, making an ask again. So think about it, take your time. I know that I've got like a running Google Doc from my former employer that has some things that I want to make sure I look at as we move forward as well. So yeah, no immediate action needed tonight. Great.
And then wanting to check to see if folks have any announcements that they'd like to share. Okay, well, one that I would want to share, it is on the calendar, but Monday is Indigenous Peoples Day, and so it's something that has been kind of acknowledged as a holiday or paid day off for some jurisdictions, not in Issaquah, but for King County it is. So just wanting to kind of share that and see if folks have the time to learn and celebrate Indigenous cultures. That day is Monday, and although it doesn't need its own day, but it could be a day of celebration. Okay, and I guess with that, I think we're ready to adjourn. I should go back to my script, but it is 8:03, and I am adjourning this meeting of the Equity Board. Thank you all for your participation. I feel like we had a great conversation around comprehensive planning and policy and code, and appreciate everyone's participation. Hope you all have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Have a good night.
Goodbye.
I was going to listen to last week's or last month's meeting. I couldn't find it. Where would it be?